selecting wires and not symbols. And so there was a question that came in, couldn't terminals also be highlighted along with the wires? You know, yeah, in theory they could be. That's not how the program works today. Just say that up front. So selecting wires and not symbols. So we have a special mode, a selection mode. When you press and hold down the Shift key, and then you click with the mouse button, we will target wires and not symbols. And this is really useful. So there's times when you'll get into a situation where you might want to put a current probe, for example, and you want to put that current probe in series with a wire. So I could, for example, copy and paste a current probe, and I'm just going to go ahead and rotate it so that I have the direction that I'm thinking it's going to be. You can just place this on a wire. Now obviously the wire there is shorting out your current probe. So normally if you went to go try to select that wire, it's pretty tricky. So you've got the symbol wants to get selected and the wire gets selected. So instead, if you press and hold the Shift key and drag a mouse box, we will select just the wires. And now you can press delete and you would have what you're after. The other place where that comes in handy is, you know, there's times when you will accidentally put a wire across 2 pins on a symbol. And again, you've got the same problem. Almost impossible to highlight that wire. Here I got lucky. So you can just do a Shift and drag a box and highlight that wire, and then, you know, if I didn't grab the symbol, you can move the wire. So it kind of gives you an idea of that selection mode. Now there's a corollary, which is we run into this problem with very short wires. And the problem is whenever you get close to a whenever you get close to a terminal symbol pin, you'll notice the program enters into a wiring mode and the cursor changes. So that Shift key, as it turns out, also disables that. So here I'm normal mode. So mouse moving towards a pin turns into auto wiring. Now, you can't see my keyboard, but I'm holding down the Shift key now and doing the exact same thing. You notice no auto wiring. So what that means is, for example, when you have a really short wire and you try and select it, you know, you can't select it because as soon as you get within half of a grid square of it, we think you want a wire to it. So in this case, sure, we could just do it with a box select, but sometimes this wire is, you know, hidden deep inside of some other symbol mess. So just press and hold the Shift key. You can get right on top of the wire and you can select it and then press delete to delete it. So it's kind of a neat little trick to select just wires. You'll see it works not just on short wires but also on longer wires. Pressing and holding the Shift key to select just wires and not symbols, and also not route to them. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of that particular item. So I think there's a question that came in. Let me go back to a schematic, and it was about whether or not we need a grid. And believe me, you need a grid. So, you know, is it possible to avoid auto-selecting on the grid entirely, or must there be an auto-select grid? We really do need a grid, or else we wouldn't know where symbols are located. They kind of need to be located on an integer location, aka a grid. Okay, a couple other questions came in. Looks like a good time to answer those. So the first one is sometimes after copying a schematic, the copied part is off grid. Can I readjust that somehow? I guess I've never seen that before. You might be thinking about somewhere in the symbol editor. That's where I've seen that kind of behavior before. And when you copy the graphical parts of a symbol from one symbol to another, and it depends on where you were on the previous grid. So I don't know what to say about that, but I know that person knows me, so they can pop me a quick email with something on that, so we can maybe move on. Okay, so let's see, any other questions before we move on to the sixth item here? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on, talking about schematic components. So schematic components are often a source of some confusion. And let me just pause and give the standard speech, which is they're really containers. Imagine a box as a container that holds two little separate parts in this box. So you put a divider right down the middle. One side of the box always holds a symbol, and the other side of the box always holds a schematic. What's really neat about this container concept is now we have a really simple way for one file to hold not only the electrical definition, which is the schematic, but also the graphical definition and the pins, which is the symbol. And so most people probably don't realize you can save a symbol from one schematic component to another. And there's some good reasons for doing that. And I'll kind of show you one of them. The other thing you can do is you can save a symbol from one of the global symbol libraries into your schematic component, which will help you save you doing some redrawing. And I'll show you that one in the symbol editor part of the program today. And then the third item I just want to make mention is when you are on a schematic and you use the file save schematic as, it only saves the schematic part of the container. It doesn't save the symbol part, whereas file save special saves both the schematic and the symbol. So before I get to key points, I think maybe a little tangible example would be in order. So suppose I descend into this hierarchy component. So this is a schematic component. And if I did, those of you who are a little newer to the program, hierarchy, open create symbol for schematic opens the symbol, or the shortcut key S. And you'll see I've got my symbol, which clearly has been worked on. It's got nice graphical lines and so on and so forth. So I'll go ahead and close that. So what I think I'll do for a demonstration is I'll use that file save schematic as, and I'll just make a temp version of this. And now I've got this, and if I run that same menu, hierarchy, open create symbol for schematic, notice you get a different symbol. So this is the auto-created symbol. This is the symbol that, as we like to say internally, only a mother could love. So here's our symbol, and the problem is if we save this symbol into our schematic component, we're going to have problems when we go to use it, because back here on the buck converter, none of those pins are going to line up. So let me go to that symbol, and I'm going to close that without saving it. So as I mentioned, we can copy symbols from one schematic component to another. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, so that I remember what I'm doing, I'm going to go ahead and close everything except for just the buck converter. And I'm going to descend into this hierarchical block. And in here, I'm going to do hierarchy, open create symbol. Instead of saving this back to drive logic and drivers hierarchy, I'm going to save this into my temp file. So I'm going to do file, save symbol. Now, it gives you a couple of options. So we have the library file, the component file, or the schematic file. So this is kind of like being saved into memory. But I know I have that other schematic component, and it's _temp. And I'll just go ahead and click OK on that. And I've just saved that symbol into the temp version. And just so that we're all clear, this is not the temp version. But what I can do is I can place that just for a test using relative path. And what do you know? There's that symbol. And it's identical. And if I think it's Shift S in here will open that symbol, and you'll notice it's pretty much a clone. So it's kind of handy. I know in the past when I've been using SIMPLIS in industry, I would sometimes, for example, I would be here. I would say, okay, I'm going to make an experiment. I'm going to save this file off, and I didn't save it with the symbol, and then I made a number of changes to the schematic. Well, now what do? Right? You need the symbol back. So that little trick shows you how to push a symbol from one schematic component to another, which is kind of handy.